through the Australian Grand Prix together. First, we're going to go through Constructor Championship order as per the first race result. Then we're going to go over some questions you guys asked on my Instagram, like why did it take 29 laps for the live timing to show up? First and foremost, Haas. In my notes during the race, I even wrote, Haas, what are we doing? Thinking Haas would do well considering they were in the points towards the end of last year, and their partnership with Toyota Gazoo Racing would put them in a solid midfield position. If you read their post-race recap, you can see that they were talking that this was a data collection race. They've been having car issues all week, but also the mention of the new engineering team. In the beginning of this year, it was announced all the staff changes Haas was going through. They had a few new hires, a lot of internal changes, and some folks wearing multiple hats. And you can see all this unravel, obviously, during the Australian Grand Prix. They're already last, why not pit? Why not try different things? What do you have to lose? Hopefully they were just brushing the dust off. Up next, Racing Bulls. Did VCARB screw Yuki Tsunoda out of a potential podium, let alone a minimum of a P5? They knew the rain was coming. On his radio, about an hour and 28 minutes in, they said 15 minutes away, rain will last 6 minutes, it's quite heavy. As he's on the mediums, they radio him again at an hour and 32 minutes in. We don't want to manage these tires just for info, we expect rain coming, so when we restart, use the tire. And then the heavy rain starts. As he was driving by the paddock, they were telling him to pit, and he was saying, it's too late. That was a terrible miscommunication. During that lap, they confirmed that he's pitting, and then they changed their minds. And as he's in the gravel, they actually tell him to stay out because the rain's not gonna get any worse.
Stay out.
And then they changed their minds, and then he finally pits for his new intermediates. Could they have called it before? Well, yeah, you can take that risk. I'm gonna put intermediates on a dry track, because then you just look ridiculous, and you're losing so much time. Some people were assuming the time for the others to then pit back into intermediates, he could make up for that time. But then you'd have to hit the sweet spot of pitting on the exact lap when that crossover happens, and that almost never happens. It's honestly the luck of the draw. Who's on the right part of the track at the right time to peel off in the pits before it gets too bad? Now, there definitely was miscommunication. He should have pitted a lot earlier than it happened. They were going back and forth. I don't understand what they were looking at, what they thought would happen if the rain wasn't as bad as they assumed because it wasn't raining on their part of the track as it was on his. He definitely should have not ended up P12. Some people's new favorite rookie, Isack Hadjar, had a really rough start. He spun out, trying to put heat in the tires, it's slippery out there, and understandably so, as millions of people are watching your first day on your job, trying to perform well, and new machinery, you are upset. Not only is your employer watching, all your potential future employers are watching. And yeah, Hadjar had an emotional moment, and that's totally understandable. As he was walking through the paddock with all these cameras in his face, Anthony Hamilton walked out to console him. Yes, Lewis Hamilton's father told him to keep his head high. And I absolutely love that. At that moment, it wasn't about a driver and a competitor's father. It wasn't about what was going on. It was a father to someone else's son being there for him, as everyone is in his face. Anthony Hamilton has definitely consoled his son before, knowing how much the pressure is, and obviously went to Isack to help him out, which I thought was incredibly wholesome and sweet. Unfortunately then, we gave a microphone to a crusty old white man who completely ruined all the wholesomeness we just watched, saying that it was embarrassing how Hadjar was upset and crying. It's Leadership 101, where you praise in public and criticize in private. I understand Formula One is a tough as sport, and I understand we have high competition, a lot of people waiting in the wings to be that guy to win the race for your team. Holy maybe you should go over what happened with him as opposed to yapping your mouth in the microphone. What are we doing here? Up next, Alpine. Unfortunately for Jack Doohan, also spun out. Jack claims it was a result of a combination of factors which we'll go over together as a team and learn from and ensure it won't happen again. Unfortunately, Briatore is definitely shredding his contract as soon as that happened, calling up Franco Colapinto. Pierre Gasly had a decent race. In their post-race report, Pierre Gasly did say that it was a tough race in really challenging conditions. He's disappointed that he didn't get any points, and it felt like a lottery out there, which is a great way to describe it. That can Alpine give him the A525 that he needs to be a midfield or top midfield contender? I don't even wanna. Do I want to even dive into this next team? Ferrari. This is Hamilton's worst season opener since 2014. During race start, Charles Leclerc did an incredible job gaining 2 positions. Big Lou, you can see he's trying to avoid the incident where Charles Leclerc loses 2 positions and is then stuck behind Alex Albon and Yuki Tsunoda for most of the race. And then this is where we start listening to the radio. They told Lewis Hamilton, very short and heavy rain, going into the last 2 laps. And then this conversation is interesting. They know rain is coming, like I said, heavy rain, 2 laps. He asked, is more rain coming? And they said, no, hopefully. Let's see. Which is wild. What are you looking at? What do you mean? It's either no or yes. What do you mean, hopefully? What are we doing? And if they did pit 2 laps earlier, Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton might be a lot closer to the podium than P8 and P10. Charles had a great start and unfortunately also fell to the Ferrari strategy. In his post-race interview, motorsport.com reports that we're just not fast enough at the beginning of the race when the race was kind of boring. And then once it mattered to make the right choice, we didn't. And this is why I say race fans are masochists. It's insane that we enjoy a sport where there's so much variability in our favorite teams and drivers. Here in motorsport, you can have the best driver in the world in a car that breaks down, involved in someone's accident, a terrible strategy choice. It's crazy how unfair it is. Kick Sauber, it was nice to see that they bought an upgraded car, especially that it got into Q2 in the qualifying. Unfortunately, at lap 47, Bortoleto did spin out on turn 12. However, Nico Hulkenberg made it up to P7. He jumped right into the top 10 because they pitted at the right time for intermediates. This earns Kick Sauber 6 points, which is more than the last 29 races combined. Up next, Aston Martin. Unfortunately, in lap 34, Fernando Alonso did spin out on turn 6, and according to journalist Elizabeth Blackstock, it was mentioned that he thinks it's a result of what he deems a dangerous reconfiguration of turn 6 at Albert Park. A miscalculation or slight error by the driver was extremely costly, as we saw with Fernando Alonso. What's going around the internet is this video of Pierre Gasly kicking up all that gravel because he made a slight mistake there on turn 6 and putting it onto the track. Well, then Fernando Alonso had to drive through it. Then there's also Lance Stroll. I'm not sure if anyone else had this in their broadcast. They were really pushing that Lance Stroll was like a wet weather specialist. When I think of wet weather specialist, I'm thinking Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton. Lance Stroll does not break the top 5 for me. The 27 Italian Grand Prix and the 2020 Turkish Grand Prix, Stroll qualified well in the wet weather. There was also a mention of 2019 German Grand Prix when Stroll decided to switch to slicks as the track was drying when everyone else did not, and he got 4th. But then we remember in 2024 what happened in Brazil. I wouldn't call him a wet weather specialist considering there's been so many more rain races in between all those examples that they showed, and I'm not sure what this agenda is from Aston Martin. However, for this race, strategy was key as he did not have crazy good pace. Lance Stroll even admits, they called me in, so I had nothing to do with it. Up next, Williams. I don't know what they did with their car, but it is incredible, and I'm glad to eat my words thinking that they wouldn't be doing well this year. You adjust your opinions as you get new data. Alex qualified 6th, Carlos Sainz qualified 10th, and unfortunately, in the beginning of the race, Carlos Sainz did crash out. But according to Carlos Sainz, it's because of a big torque kick. According to his own website, he wrote, without going into details, it's related to the upshifts when the car is in safety car mode. Now, Alex had an incredible race, ending up P5. And he said that Williams spoke before the race about capitalizing on opportunities early. He then quoted to say that the first race, it's not easy to be dialed in, but they absolutely were. Up next, Red Bull Racing. Liam Lawson, not having a good weekend. I don't think he wants to remember this weekend. In his post-race interviews, he knows he f***ed up. And Max Verstappen had a Max Verstappen race. Finish 0.895 behind Norris. Good call by Red Bull. Verstappen drove the car. And now I'm wondering if they really only build cars for Max Verstappen. It's kind of wild we're not talking about Mercedes more as a whole because I think more exciting things happen and they want the boring, traditional way. Now, Kimi Antonelli did not have good qualifying, but he made up for it definitely in the race, combined with a great strategy call to switch back into intermediates. He was running in clear air. He wasn't too far off George Russell's pace, although unlike Toto Wolff, I do not think he's the second coming of Jesus Christ. I do think he's an incredible racer, and I'm excited to see what he produces for the rest of the season. George Russell certainly had a race, and the problem is he did well the boring way. Clean race, clean car, didn't do anything crazy, passed people correctly, and no one's talking about it. Consistency wins championships. Up next, McLaren, which I feel like is a tricky one to talk about because people want to be upset about it, but I think it went actually pretty well for them. The big thing is people upset about the team orders, not team orders, especially on the broadcast when Zach Brown is on it. He's saying that they're allowed to race. And then you're hearing their radio saying they're not allowed to race. Some people got confused. They were approaching the back markers. You're not going to try to pass a back marker and your teammate, especially in these kind of conditions where the wet line is just not worth it. And I understand Piastri's upset. Could he have potentially passed Norris and the back markers and done it all? Sure. Did they want to risk it, knowing they can definitely get both of them on the podium? Probably not. After they passed the back markers, they were then definitely allowed to race, but by then Piastri was a little bit too far off, and then all these yellow flags and the rain again started happening. I also believe it was McLaren who did a beautiful double stack. However, on the broadcast, I didn't see any of the timings, and it was kind of frustrating. I know Piastri's definitely lasted a little bit longer than Lando Norris's, but however, Lando Norris on the radio, completely different person than he was last year. This man was making accurate strategy calls, confident in his strategy calls. They also stopped yapping as much on the McLaren radio, which I'm a big fan of. Last year, it was too many questions. It was like, answer these riddles 3 and I'll let you get P1. Finally, they've shortened and sweetened the message here.
To not have a mistake that cost me anything, I guess I can take a little bit of credit for that.
Which is interesting because he's usually really hard on himself. I don't know if you saw a sports psychologist. I don't know what McLaren did. But if Lando was this locked in for the rest of the year, I think we can easily see a World Drivers' Championship run from him. Let's go through your questions. First one I got, why do teams get so reactionary in regards to wet weather? Is it car sensitivity? I mean, basically yes. So any changes to airflow due to the rain, water droplets, etc. changes the aerodynamics of the car. And track evolution is unpredictable. The racing line can dry out quickly, it can dry out slowly, you're trying to fall, you can't pass off the dry line because it's a little bit more dangerous. There's a lot more to consider, and the already variability of a Formula One race, that wet weather just keeps adding more. Up next, what's up with non-deployment of DRS under the 1 second mark? They might not be allowed to during wet weather conditions and safety car restarts. The FIA does not allow DRS to be used. There's also detection zones, right? So if a driver is a second or more in a detection zone, and suddenly they're less than a second in the DRS zone, they're still not allowed to use DRS, because in the detection zone, they weren't in DRS range. It could be a strategic choice also to not want to pass yet. They're either managing tires, they don't want to lose time in a fight, they're waiting for a better overtaking spot. However, if they did use DRS and you're wondering why no one was overtaken, DRS is on an overtaking button. DRS effectiveness is dependent on straight lengths, dirty air and corner speed exit, car setup, tire condition and grip difference, headwind and tailwind, and again, a lot of other variables that they pay the strategists a lot of money for. Well, I hope they do. Let's talk about how ass the new graphics are. I'm fine with the new graphics. They show the same thing. They look a little different, but whatever. I'm not a big fan of the number 1 being highlighted on the timing in red. I think that's a sponsorship thing. I do find it interesting that they do show the fastest lap even though it doesn't count anymore. Exclamation marks aren't my favorite, but also not the end of the world. I can deal with it. What really frustrated me is it took 29 laps for any timing or gap timing to show up. And then even then, they weren't shown consistently. They also didn't record any pit stop timing, so I don't know how fast or how slow any of the pit stops were. They just had to do the same thing from last year. Control-C, Control-V, like what are we doing? Why did some drivers go for hards rather than mediums? As I mentioned before in the Ferrari team radio, they mentioned it was a very long race. Till the end, they weren't sure about the safety car, when it was going to come in. You just rather stay out. Some teams saw an opportunity, took the gamble, others decided to play it safe. My favorite question, why is Ferrari the way they are? It's a long-running joke, and though it's really highlighted recently, this actually goes back decades. I've seen this personally as a problem post-Schumacher era when Ross Brawn left the strategy team in Ferrari. They play a lot of follow the leader, seeing what other teams do, and they're hesitant to make bold calls, leading to often reactionary decisions instead of proactive ones. Ferrari also trusts their raw data a lot as opposed to adapting to their real-time conditions. And honestly, poor communication where they're asking drivers, there seem to be a lot of questions and just confusion over the radio. So why are Ferrari the way they are? Because it's the way they've always done it. Will Williams still have the same pace in China as they did in Australia? We can kind of ask that for every single team. And they are 2 completely different tracks, so potentially no. But the makings of a good team, an engineering team, yes. So the aerodynamic, suspension, ride height, tire wear is all going to be different in China than it is in Australia. And that's why we have to wait, realistically, a couple of races before we say anything crazy, and then you can compare and contrast when you have more data, because that's how it works. I'm excited for China and another one of these videos. Hopefully you guys like it. Let me know what you want more of, what you want less of, if you want more questions answered, FAQs, etc. And I'm excited to see what China brings.